We are back, and we are waiting for comments from Secretary of State John Kerry. He's expected to address the horrific attack that took place in the offices of a satirical newspaper in Paris this morning. Steve Emerson is the executive director of the Investigative Project on Terrorism, and he joins me now. Steve, your reaction to this and your thoughts on how prepared we are for something like this here at home.
Well, first of all, I wish I was surprised, but in the last 4 weeks, as you know, Martha, France has experienced 3 similar attacks. Unfortunately, French government officials refused to categorize them as Islamic terrorist attacks due to political correctness. Fortunately, they did characterize this one today, but our government today in this morning's press reaction by Josh Earnest refused to call it an Islamic terrorist attack, did call it terrorist, but just called it extremism. Bottom line here, these are Islamic terrorist attacks and need to be called as such. The second thing is that these attacks are induced not by ISIS alone, not by Al-Qaeda alone, but by, quote, Muslim Brotherhood groups acting in the West that always spread the ideological poison that there's a war against Islam. These are very groups that are invited to do outreach by the White House or by Western governments, and that's the #1 inducement to carry out such attacks. So are we prepared? Well, bottom line is the FBI has been doing a great job in stopping 98% of the terrorist plots since 9/11. But you can't stop all of them. So if armed terrorists want to go into a building of journalists or commercial activities, they can carry out such an attack and kill scores of people. Yeah. The question is whether we can deter it or whether we can use informants and get them in place in time. And I don't know whether we can do that.
Well, you've touched on something that I think is so central to this fight, because, no, you can't protect every single building in every city. It simply can't be done. But we did hear quite a bit about all of the people, hundreds, who had passports, who went to Syria and went to the Middle East to train with some of these groups. Now, I often ask myself what the follow-up has been on that and how good of a job we're doing at figuring out who these people are before they walk into these buildings, Steve.
Well, here's the question, Martha. I don't think we're doing a good enough job of identifying them, these volunteer fighters for ISIS or for jihadis overseas, before they go or after they return. That's #1. Certainly in Europe, they haven't identified them properly. That's why they had the attacks in France last year or in Belgium. #2, you don't need to go to France, to Syria or Iraq anymore to become a jihadi. You go online to learn how to build a bomb. You can acquire weapons here. And 3, the motivation is here, online or in the communities among radical mosques in the West, in the United States, or in Paris. That's the bottom line here. You don't see denunciations of radical Islam by name by mainstream Islamic groups. What you hear is that this has nothing to do with Islam. Yeah. Now, of course, mainstream, Islam is not the definition of terrorism. Far from it. The point is, there is a wing within Islam, radical Islamists, who believe in this, and they have to be condemned. And unless they're ostracized and delegitimized, these attackers and these attacks are going to continue. And ultimately, you can't seal off and insulate all of society from attacks. They're going to succeed ultimately. So as a counterterrorist specialist, what I say here is that the only way to defeat this type of Islamic terrorism is ultimately to drive them from the blessings of the community of those radical Islamists that live within us. And unless we do it, we're going to continue to see this. And unless we call it what it is, radical Islamic extremism, radical Islamic terrorism, we're going to give them a free pass.
They are encroaching on new places and new ground, as they have seen this morning. Steve, thank you very much. Good to have you with us.